Today we're going to change the topic a little bit and talk about how I came about some of my conclusions and beliefs and even facts. I'll just start talking about a series of cases I had early in my career and what I learned from them. As I mentioned earlier, I believe that the district attorney of Denver that persecuted Mrs. Tannenbaum got rewarded by an opportunity to run for Congress and be in the Congress for a one session, two-year term. And there he got a grant for Denver and was able to establish that Denver had an organized crime problem. And he got a manual made out of it, which actually was plagiarized from Sutherland and Cressy's third edition of criminology. While they were trying to establish that and create an enemy to fight, there were several curious cases that came up. For instance, one of the ones that I thought was rather humorous was a shootout at a bakery on 38th Avenue in Denver. It was a shootout at Darlene's. Now, what had happened is that the intelligence community wanted to raise some money, and they recruit various people to do so and come up with these various scams, and things disappear. They make insurance claims, and then they split the money with the perpetrator. So there was this game going on in Denver and various other cities called a diamond switch. A person would go in and show a diamond to get it appraised, and then asked to look at some other diamonds, and then switch one out that was similar to the one he was looking at. Now, this young Turk guy in his 20s borrowed a diamond worth about $30,000 in 1970 from a local Italian. And the Italian was allegedly connected, which I suppose he was. I never asked. Anyway, the older Italian wanted his gemstone back, his diamond back, and the younger guy put him off for quite a while. And finally, when it became obvious that there was going to be a long stall, the older guy said, let's meet somewhere and talk this out. So they have a meeting with seconds, I guess you would call them, at the place, and the older guy had his second as a guy that had cataract glasses, the old Coke bottle types that you had in the old days. He was called Joe the Ram. And the young Turk had two people with him, a guy named Tony Chick and Mikey. So the young Turk goes in there. His name was Joey. And the old man shows up, demands his diamond back. And the young Turk says, go fuck yourself. Well, them's fighting words in most locales. And so their threats exchange back and forth. And finally, the old guy gets irate and said, I'm going to we'll settle this some other way. You better watch your back from now on. And the young guy pulls out a gun. And he says, you're done in this town, jokers. points the gun at the old guy, pulls the trigger, the old guy faints, and the gun goes click, 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 click. What had happened is these young gangsters had a centerfire pistol and put rimfire shells into it, and they didn't go off. In the meantime, Tony Chick takes the Ram's glasses, does a jig on him on the floor, smashing him into smithereens. So during this fight, he's going, checking this, that, and the other, looking for his glasses. He's out on the floor looking for his glasses. His boss has fainted. The young guy's going click, click, click with the gun. And it's something like out of a comedy, an Abbott Costello one, or Three Stooges comedy, whatever. Finally, the older guy wakes up. He takes his gun out and points it at the young guy, pulls the trigger, and a bullet comes out and glances off a rib and goes around glances off a button, goes around the rib cage. At that time, everybody sort of cooled down, and they stuffed the young guy in the hospital, or in the car, and drive the car to the hospital and dump him off there to be treated for his gunshot wound. Well, somehow the Denver police heard about it, and they sent some officers to the hospital. And they interview him regarding the gunshot, and he says, well, tell us what happened. Who shot you? How'd this happen? And the guy says, well, I'm not real sure. And he stalls around, and finally one of the cops said, we kind of know what happens, and we're going to prosecute you for some other things unless you agree to testify. He says, I can't testify because they're my friends. And the cop says, well, shooting you in the rib doesn't look like a very friendly act to me. And anyway, they talked the young Turk into testifying against the old guy who was sort of running the crew. And they indict him. Well, at that point, they need witnesses. And the witnesses that seal of this all of a sudden do a disappearing act. So after a few weeks, maybe a month or month and a half, the old guy is getting nervous because he needs the witness to talk about self-defense and things like this. And of course, the witnesses aren't showing up. That's one way to change administrations, let the police do the job for you. So he's awaiting his trial, sweating bullets, so to speak, at least not fainting over him. And all of a sudden, somebody carelessly leaves a bunch of cleaning fluid, in fact, 2 50-gallon drums of fluid, behind the ice cream parlor, and somehow it spontaneously explodes. The next day, a client comes in, he owns the ice cream parlor, and he says, I understand that there's a subpoena for me. Could you give him a call and see what it's about? And I called and, of course, arranged to pick up the subpoena for my client. And at that point, the case was dropped because it was obvious to even the dumbest police officer that there was a self-defense in the case, and they couldn't proceed. But that started a whole series of other prosecutions, because while they were interviewing the young Turk, he talked about some other things that had gone on, and it led to some other serious complications. But regarding the shootout, one of my clients had been convicted of travel in aid of racketeering, and he got charged or indicted in federal court with possession of firearm by a previous felon. This was a new statute, and the government's position was that he had been convicted of a felony, even though it was on appeal, and that he gave the gun to the young Turk, which turned out not to have worked because it was a different firing mechanism. And since he gave the gun, he had to be in possession of it to give it to him. Therefore, he was in possession of a gun as a previously convicted felon. So they charge him. Well, at another hearing, he was testifying in a state court matter, and the firearms case was in federal court. In the state court matter, a prosecutor prosecuting a case in which he was a witness objected when asked if my client had a gun. And the prosecutor said, we shouldn't ask that question because it puts him in jeopardy, and without advisement, he shouldn't answer that. And he should be advised of his rights. And the lawyer says, I don't know of any violation. And the judge says, well, I don't know of any violation either. Go ahead and answer the question. Well, the violation was he confessed on a witness stand that he had possessed a gun while having been convicted of a felony. So there was all kinds of negotiation between state and federal court and things such as this. One of the complications was in the previous case, the lawyer defending one of these people got appointed to the Supreme Court. And I was trying to allege a conflict of interest because a former Supreme Court judge who had represented my client at one time had sort of advised him that he wasn't confessing to any violation of the law if he testified he gave a gun to another client. Well, this wasn't so. So my associate handled that, and he gets there and starts asking questions about this, that, or the other, and asked if anybody in his firm had represented my client in the past. And the Supreme Court judge couldn't remember. And he had amnesia for several of the questions afterward, whereupon our motion to suppress evidence based on conflict of interest and ill advisement was denied, which put me in an interim appeal state. Well, at that time, it was new legislation, and there were two cases going up to appellate courts and later to the Supreme Court on possession of firearms. And it was cited as U.S. versus Bass, but it was combined with U.S. versus Boggs and U.S. versus Bridwell. And that was the case in which the possession of firearm by a felon was thrown out by the U.S. Supreme Court and was one of my first appearances in the U.S. Supreme Court. But it was kind of an interesting case, and there's a reason that I'm telling you this that I'll go into next time. Thank you for watching.